Hello guys and welcome back to my channel, and today I will be doing a review for Black Myth Wukong after beating it 100% based on Mortismal's Gaming's review. So yes, I did beat the game 100% and I had a lot of fun. I wanted to do a quick little review based on Mortismal's Gaming, and let's tune in, like and subscribe to the channel, like and share this video on YouTube. Let's go.
What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Black Myth Wukong, a third-person action-adventure based on Chinese mythology and the novel Journey to the West. Now, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below to a video covering everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. Now, specifically in regards to this game, it's important to mention that I did not get a review key for this, but even if I had, I definitely would not have hit the embargo or anything, as in a situation that was similar to what Elden Ring wound up being for me, I really had to compile information and work on figuring things out for myself in step with the community, really, though I did use a few guides as they were being put together to really puzzle some of this stuff out. With that in mind, at the time of this recording, those guides are almost complete, and by the time this video goes live, they might be very close if not done. So I'm going to link to the two I relied on most heavily, while I was also trying to figure some of this stuff out just on my own. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move on to the rest of this. So starting with an overview. As I mentioned, third-person action combat game. Now, I have seen a lot of people arguing about whether this is or is not a Souls-like, and let me tell you, as somebody who has reviewed hundreds of games, I think getting really specific about genre labels is typically a waste of time. But to me personally, I would say this game feels like somebody took some minor Souls mechanics and slap them into a God of War game. And
Yes, I can agree to that, because when I started playing this game, I'm like, this has a lot of elements of God of War, has a lot of elements of Soul-like games. Me personally, I don't really like Soul-like games just because I hate restarting all the way from the beginning. But it is a challenge. These games challenge you, right? But I like the fact that they put a lot of God of War elements into this game. And yeah, we're still waiting for part 3 for God of War. Just saying. So I can agree to that.
And as such, this game's pretty much entire focus is on combat and uncovering secrets to thus enable more combat, if anything.
Yes, I can agree to that as well. There are so many secrets in this game. There's like a lot of secret bosses that you can overlook if you're not looking hard enough, right? So I really can agree to that.
And if that's your thing, this game does that incredibly well. But if you don't enjoy that, realistically, this game has nothing to offer you, which is what I'm going to try to highlight over the course of this one. Now, in order to do that, there's almost certainly going to be what some people would consider minor spoilers in like the footage, mostly of like boss fights and stuff, because it's hard to explain something in a game with so many boss fights without, referencing them. And then the story section, there's a couple specific things I want to mention that might be considered spoilers as well. So use that information at your own discretion to decide what you want to watch. But first, let's talk about the technical state of this one before we get into everything else. And for the most part, I would say this game ran pretty well. Now, obviously, this game is gorgeous, especially maxed out on PC. However, there are still a couple things to mention. There is a common enough problem with the game crashing during shader compilation caused by 13th and 14th Intel CPUs, which is an ongoing problem with those CPUs specifically. That's not necessarily...
So I can understand where he's coming from also. When I tried streaming this game, and that I've noticed, I tried streaming this game on Twitch and Kick and whatever, I have seen that there is a bit of a glitch after like I finish recording. Like I'll review the video over and then I'll see like bits and pieces of the scenes like stop, but you can still hear the actual gaming music, like that's basically on point. Like the picture will be frozen, but the music will keep going on. So that's what I noticed also.
Necessarily the games.
But the performance is still good. I mean, other than that, other than the glitching after recording, I mean, it didn't stop or freeze while I was playing on my screen. It just kind of stopped and freeze like when I was recording. That was it, really.
If you've been following Intel news at all, you very well may know about this already, but it's a whole thing. There's a helpful solution of just sort of undervolting your CPU a little bit in those cases, which will typically help. But if you are uncomfortable doing that, the game does seem to sort itself out after like 1 to 2 crashes when it is compiling those shaders. Now, outside of shader compilation, I still actually had some issues with the occasional bit of stuttering, which is common in Unreal Engine games for sure, but otherwise the rest of it ran very smoothly for me. But do be aware you may run into some minor issues, but for the most part, this game seems to be running well. Now, a specific note on PC in particular, though, mostly for people like myself who insist on playing games like this with keyboard and mouse, which I acknowledge is a small percentage, you cannot.
It is a small percentage. I mean, I'm a PS5 gamer. I would never play this game on a PC. Like, I would get so messed up while trying to defeat these bosses. So he's right about the small percentage.
Not fully rebind the keys. And I think that's a shame because I think for the most part, this game actually has really good keyboard and mouse controls. But if they would just let you rebind all of the keys, I think they would be in fantastic shape there. And I just wanted to mention it. Now, let's talk difficulty a little bit. So this game only has the one difficulty, really. But it's honestly not a super difficult game, especially if you've played a lot of action combat games. I got stuck on one boss, and it was at the very end, and I just left, did some other stuff, leveled up and came back, and then it was fine. I think the only time you might really struggle with a boss is if you are trying to tackle it before you likely should be, and you simply didn't explore enough, and maybe you just beelined it a little too early. But other
So yeah, he is absolutely right. I think I got stuck on several bosses, not just one. I think I got stuck on I forgot what boss was that. I think it was in chapter 2, where I think it was the sand area, where the last one, it was like a huge rat, and he had like a huge like head in his shoulder, and he had to do like, he was doing a lot of like combo moves with like thunderstorms and stuff like that. I got really stuck on him. I got stuck on the thunder god, the Buddha thunder god with he looks like Santa Claus and stuff. I think that was chapter 5 or 4, something like that. I got stuck on him, but actually he wasn't that hard. I just had to like literally trying to figure out a strategy how to defeat him. I got stuck on Duskville, which is a boss in a secret area in chapter 5. Where it's, I think chapter 5 is no, not chapter 5, I'm sorry, was it chapter 4 or 5? I'm kind of getting confused about the chapters, but it was the bug chapter with the spiders and the bugs and the worms. It was that one. So there is a secret area in that chapter where there is this huge boss you have to defeat called Duskville. Like, he has 2 forms, but I kept getting stuck on the second form. The first form is great. The second form is just a pain in the ass. So yes, there is one difficulty. It's not like God of War where you can go from easy to hard to harder. So for the most part, this game is rather difficult. It's as difficult as Elden Ring. I mean, I played Elden Ring for a few minutes and then I quit because I kept dying, but it's kind of similar. Hopefully this does go for Game of the Year. Pray and hope. And so yeah, like this game, when it comes to bosses, they have it down packed, literally down packed. And so I only got stuck on a few, but for the most part. And another thing, if you don't farm and you don't get experience and you don't unlock skills, you are not going to defeat these bosses. You have to farm. You have to take the time to farm. You can't just go from one chapter to the other chapter to the other chapter without really exploring the areas, really exploring to see what they have to offer. And you never know, you might encounter like a mini boss fight that you could probably potentially get like a good gear or a good curios or a good skill from that boss, right? So you really have to explore all of these chapters thoroughly. You need to farm, gain experience in order for you to make this game a little bit more easier for you, right? That way you can kind of overpower the following bosses. So I do agree.
Otherwise, it's not what I would consider a difficult game, but there is just the one difficulty. With that in mind, this game does have a New Game Plus mode that increases the challenge posed by enemies and things after the main story. But
so I did defeat the whole game 100%. Like I said in the beginning of this game, I do have the New Game Plus. I am considering about playing the New Game Plus, I have heard that after you do pick New Game Plus, it gets even harder. So I I gotta farm a little bit more myself, but I don't know how much harder they're gonna make this game though. I mean, it's already as hard as it can get, but hopefully I'll be okay. So
But if you've been doing everything up to that point, gathering as much as you can secret-wise, even New Game Plus is likely to be very easy in comparison to your first.
so yes, something I wanted to mention when he said if you're doing everything secret, please make sure that you guys are unlocking the secret areas of every chapter. There is a secret area in chapter 3, which is called Mount May. I think you only get to unlock Mount May if you. I think if you unlock it in chapter 4 or chapter, like if you keep progressing into the game, you'll be able to go into Mount May and get in there. So definitely unlock all the secret areas, defeat all of them because you do get really good gear, especially in the fire chapter. I think fire chapter, it might be chapter 5. I'm not really too sure. Yeah, I think it's chapter 5. And so when you enter the secret area, there's about 3 bosses you have to defeat. The last one is the Dustvale Beast, something like that. And you get really good armor from that guy. Like you like literally like attack power is like 160, between 160 and like 200. That's how much power you're gonna get in these pieces of gear. So definitely I do recommend to open up all the secret areas, defeat all of the secret bosses in those secret areas. It's really worth it.
Run. So broadly speaking, outside of a couple bosses that I think were a little more challenging than the others, this game is mostly fine difficulty-wise, which is a good place to talk about the story. Now, the story itself is based on the novel Journey to the West, so if you're familiar with that, you'll kind of get the gist of this before.
I really want to read that book because I have heard that this game is based off of that. And there's also a show. I keep seeing this specific clip of Wukong, Sun Wukong, somebody playing him in a costume in some show. So I definitely want to check out the show. I don't know what the show's name is. I definitely want to check out the Journey to the West book and kind of read and to see what the story is really about. Like, I do enjoy that after we defeat the chapters, like there is like a mini cutscene of anime and kind of explaining the story behind every chapter, but it kind of gets confusing because I don't know how to connect all those cutscenes together. So I definitely want to read the book. I definitely want to go check out the show just to kind of get a gist of the story itself.
Before you even start. Now, for this part, do be aware of spoilers a little bit, but I'm going to talk about the basic narrative setup and then a few specific things, but I'm not going to get like nitty gritty into the narrative detail here. Now, to start the game, we are playing as Sun Wukong, fighting against the
Sun
celestial
Wukong.
host who has shown up to bring him to heal. This is going well before his power seemingly fails him, and he is ultimately killed in this battle where he plummets to the earth. Now, following this, we get a framing device where an old monkey was telling our character, the destined one, this story alongside another group of monkeys. And the gist of it is basically that if someone can go and find the relics that belong to Sun Wukong, they may very well be able to bring him back to life, which is where the game starts. We're basically on a hunt for those relics which compose the game's different chapters. Now, from a narrative standpoint, each of these chapters is like a set location. So it's not an interconnected world, but rather each chapter is a large expansive level that you're moving through with all sorts of secrets and stuff to find. You can travel between these freely as you unlock them in the story. You can absolutely teleport back to the others. And while there are a couple of missable things, the vast majority of it is not, because you can go back to it at basically any time. So if you're looking to get everything out of this game, I would say run through the game once, normally kind of doing as much as you can. After you beat the game, you can continue to play it until you New Game Plus. Then you can run back through each chapter, looking for anything you may have missed, secret areas, side events, that kind of thing. And
This boss fight right here, bottom takes top, top takes bottom. It was really interesting because it's like you're basically trying to defeat 2 people at the same time. This is the fire chapter. this is actually the secret area in chapter 5 that you get to fight them in. I would definitely recommend to get their spirit. You won't get it after you defeat them here. What's going to happen is you have to teleport to, I think, Rashna Palace. And then if you go straight into the throne, make a left, if you keep staying towards the left, you're going to see their the spiked spear. I think it's open, or I think it's still closed, and then there's going to be like a purple firelight right in the middle, and that's how you get their spirit. But in order for that ball to fall, you definitely have to progress into chapter 5. I think our buddy, the little bullhorn that we're with traveling around, he does kick the sphere down to the side of the cliff. Once he does that, then you can teleport back to Rashna Palace and go get the spirit. But you will not be able to get their spirit after you defeat them. You have to wait until this guy kicks the ball to the side of the cliff, and then that's how you'll be able to get it.
You can wrap up a bunch of other stuff before you go into New Game Plus, which is going to be required for some of the achievements. And then you can focus on anything you may have missed in your first run. But because of that framing, it's actually possible to get both of the endings in a single playthrough, because you can beat the game, it drops you right before the last boss again, then you can go do the side stuff required to unlock the good ending, and do that all in one run. So if you just care about that and not the New Game Plus stuff for achievements, that's also pretty easy to do. Now, before we talk about the endings a little bit, I first want to talk about some pacing issues I think the game has. So for the most part, I enjoyed the story, I enjoyed the journey through it, fighting all these different bosses. I think for the most part that narrative's fairly easy to understand, if maybe a little disjointed in places, but there are two things that I wanted to mention here specifically. Act 3 is way too long. It is, I would say, double to triple the length of every other act of the game, and in the 30 hours it took me to do my first full clear of the title, Act 3 legitimately made up about 10 hours of that. Now, as a bit of a follow-up to that, Act 6 is very short by comparison. It's basically just a few boss fights that you can quickly burn through before the end of the game. With that in mind, however, it's framed very differently than the rest of the other chapters, because we get access to the iconic flying cloud to navigate this big open area. However,
So I have called this cloud the Nimbus cloud. I don't know why that name came to me. But yeah, it does suck that we're only able to use this cloud in chapter 6, which makes sense because chapter 6 is very broad. It's like a huge platform. And then in order for us to, and the crazy part is that there's like no enemies. The only enemies that's in chapter 6 is just bosses. That's it. You see like, little animals running around in the forest and whatever in the grass, but that's it. Like there's no enemies in chapter 6. That's another thing that I wanted to say also. But we can only use the cloud in chapter 6. I wish we can use the cloud in other chapters. That would have been cool, but I think maybe they made it like this so that way we don't burn through the chapters quick. And that's why they gave us the cloud just in chapter 6, because it is a huge area to cover. And then it's a little tricky also because we have different like secret bosses. Like there's a boss literally like once you get out of the Viridian like path and you go, and then after you defeat the Supreme Inspector, you make a left, and then once you get off to that cliff right down below into the water, there's the last long dragon that you have to defeat. And he's actually like, to me, he was actually one of the easiest long battles ever. So there's one in the water. There's another one in the water that's like a hippo or something like that. There's one towards the right where it's another frog from the Balilang tribe of frogs. Then there's a cricket that's not really a boss fight. You just have to get like your antennas and whatever. Then there's like this huge Shigadang boss that if you keep going straight, make a left into the rocks, he's like this huge freaking boss fight and whatever. All you have to do is just dodge his shock waves and you'll be fine. And then you get his one of the what is this Shaska forms or whatever. And there's a few other ones, right? So it's just bosses in this chapter. There's nothing else.
However, they have basically none of this marked or explained, so it's very easy to get lost here. And ironically, I think this chapter could use a tiny bit more structure than it has, or at least some better pointers towards what you're supposed to be trying to do. because on a first playthrough, I basically just spent a couple hours bumbling around this area until I kind of stumbled into what I was supposed to be doing, and I think that part felt a little weak by comparison. Now from there, I want to talk about the endings, and I want to do this a little bit broadly so I don't go into like full spoiler territory, but there's some information I think is worth sharing. There are what I would consider two endings. I have seen some people say there are three, but one of those three endings they're talking about is technically just a prerequisite to one of the endings, the good ending. I've also heard rumors there's some super secret ending, but that doesn't seem to be true, and there's certainly no achievements for it. Now, the bad ending, if you want to put it that way, or just the regular ending, if anything, you get by just running through the game and beating the boss normally. However, after you do that, potentially, there is a little more to do. In particular, if you go back to an area in Chapter 3, actually, you can find a secret boss that becomes available in, I think it's Chapter 6, that leads into a bunch more narrative stuff that then gives you access to the good ending. And I tell you all that simply to tell you that I think there is a lot to uncover about this game on your own if you want to, and obviously all of that is available through guides already, but exploring a lot of that and kind of puzzling it out for myself over the launch week of this game was a lot of fun, and I think sort of added some mystery to it as well, which I think really fit the vibe of this game quite well, and I thought a lot of that was simply well done. Now with that in mind, let's move on to progression systems. This game has a lot of progression systems.
So as far as what he's talking about the good and bad ending, I know that if you don't go back to Mount May before defeating the last boss, which is Sukon himself, you have to defeat Stone Monkey and Sukon, Son Wukong. I'm sorry. Then you get the default ending. If you go back to Mount May, and then you meet up with Baby Buddha, which we just saw right now, he basically teleports you into Mount May and you have to defeat Erlang Shang. I did do a video about how to defeat Erlang Shang in my YouTube channel. It's going to be, the description is, well, the title is How to Defeat Erlang Shang, All Phases, and also the ending and last final boss fight with all phases as well. Definitely go check out that video. I do explain step by step how to defeat him in the easiest possible way. I think that was the good ending. So as far as the super secret ending, I haven't heard of that either. Like what he said, I don't think it exists. It's just rumors. But definitely go check out that video. But I think that was a good ending. After you defeat Erlang Shang and then you go and defeat Stone Monkey and Son Wukong, then I think that's the better ending. I don't know. Because I know that after you defeat Erlang Shang plus the two boss fights at the end of the game, you do get a anime cutscene as to what happens after you defeat them and everything.
So we have our level, armor, curios, weapons, spirits, transformation, magic, pills, gourds, and even some secondary progression systems like the village or fast travel, unlocking secrets, that kind of stuff. There's just a lot of different progression systems here, so I'm going to try to go through those in a bit of detail, but my apologies if I miss something minor. Now, the easiest one to start with is leveling up. This game does use a traditional leveling system. You defeat enemies, you get experience for that, you level up, and then you get sparks. Sparks are basically skill points. You spend these skill points on the various trees you'll be unlocking. Most of these are available right away, but some can be upgraded and you unlock those as you unlock the corresponding ability as part of story progression, such as certain magic abilities. Basically, the higher the level, the more skill points you have, the better off you are, because you can unlock more and more potential. Now, you can respec freely at shrines, so if you mess up and you need to try again or you want to just try something else in general, absolutely fine to do that. Then we have armor. So as we start defeating certain bosses and stuff, we can unlock armor that can be crafted at the shrines. Now obviously this is going to give you better and better stuff, but about halfway through the game it's possible to unlock a village of sorts that kind of puts a lot of your upgrade merchants in the same place that you can then teleport to, called the Zodiac Village. When you do that, there's actually an NPC there you haven't met before with this big tiger. He is capable of upgrading your armor. So until you get to him, gear is very linear. But once you get to him, you can actually upgrade your previous gear, which brings it up to tiers. All of your armor has a rarity tier, and it has stats associated with that. So once you unlock this guy and you have the resources, you can start upgrading your favorite armor pieces to bring them up to par with the other armor you're finding, which helps.
So I just want to say one thing though. So yes, the upgrading system is pretty good. And yes, when you do unlock the village Zodiac, Ying Tiger becomes available. And also I don't like the fact that we can't upgrade our weapons. We can only upgrade our armor, not our weapons. That's the kind of suckish part. But I mean, it is good that we can upgrade armor, but I wish we can upgrade weapons too. We can craft the weapon, but we just can't upgrade the weapon. So
balance armor sets out so you're not dealing with a purely linear armor progression, which I thought was nice, especially because one of my favorite sets of armor, because they all do have set bonuses, wound up being a relatively early one, so it had bad stats. But later on, especially in New Game Plus, when I was able to upgrade that armor and bring it back up to par with everything else, I was having a blast with the game all of a sudden. But for the bulk of your main playthrough, armor progression is linear. Then we have curios. These are like accessories that you can put on. They have all sorts of little effects. Some of them work together, but worth a mention that you can unlock and find those around. And you even unlock a third slot at a certain point, even though you only start with 2. Then there are
so when yes, so the third curio slot can only be unlocked if you defeat Ying Tiger in the Zodiac Village. So when you go up to him and then you see the menu that says craft armor, upgrade armor, craft weapon, whatever, then there's gonna say something about challenge. I think it's defeat or challenge, something like that. So once you click that, he stops doing what he's doing and he's like, oh, you want to challenge me? Okay. And then you have to defeat him. He has no phases. He just has literally one phase. You defeat him, and then you'll be able to unlock the third curio slot. I think we already have 2 curio slots open once we start playing the game, but the third one, you have to defeat the Ying Tower. He's a little difficult. He is a little difficult. I didn't do a strategy step by step on how to defeat him, but I did defeat him in one of my videos. I don't know which video it is. I'll try to put it in the description if I can. But I think it might be the third or fourth video. I'm not really too sure. I will have to check all of my videos before. I'll try to put it in the description if I can.
Weapons. Now, I was very happy to see that we unlock all sorts of different weapons. And
also the spear, like he just had the Chubei spear. Spears are more effective than the staffs. Just because it's a little more sharper and their attack strength is a little bit larger. Definitely use spears more than the staffs. They do more damage. I think the best spear to get best spear to get in order to get like the most attack and whatever is the one where you defeat Erlang Sheng in the secret area in Mount Mei. He does give you a spear, which I think the attack is about like 150, 160. It's actually a little bit stronger than the regular Su Wukong staff. So I would definitely recommend to go defeat Erlang Shen and get the spear weapon.
For the most part, these can be upgraded. There's 1 or 2 that are purely unique and cannot be, but some can be upgraded to take on different appearances and have different effects. This works largely the same way as the armor system, as you might expect. Now then we get into the more interesting stuff. First up, we have spirits. So defeating some versions of enemies, typically they have like a blue aura, and they are stronger than their normal variants. And then sometimes just like bosses and stuff will drop a spirit version of themselves. And you can absorb that into your gourd once you reach a certain point in Act 1. It's relatively early on. And once you do that, you can equip a spirit to your character that then you can summon in to perform whatever their like main version of the attack was. These can be upgraded to be more and more effective as you go as well, and they recharge after use, so this is one of your options in combat. But the progression here is just unlocking all.
So I think the best spirit to use is the Jesus Christ. I call him Big Head. But it's the first, yeah, it's basically the first spirit that you get. You get the spirit after you defeat it in that forest in chapter 1. I keep forgetting his name, but he basically goes in and he hits you with his huge head. I think that's one of the best spirits. Also, top takes bottom, bottom takes top is actually a good spirit, just because when you use it, it's basically a rolling spike ball and it hits the enemy 3 times. It's actually very effective to use that spirit, especially on enemies that have armor. Especially use it with Erlang Shang, because that's how I was able to defeat him, with that spirit.
The different spirits to use and then upgrading those spirits. Now that's not all in terms of other enemies though, because then we have transformations. Rarely, typically as part of like side quests or just optional.
This transformation right here, he's actually the first transformation we get. He's pretty good. Yeah, I've never really upgraded him. I wish I did, because he's really fast, really good, really nice combos. But I think he's He's one of the best transformations out there. There are many transformations, a lot of other transformations. And also, if you unlock the secret area and I think the bug chapter with the spiders and the bugs and stuff, if you open up that secret area there, you'll be able to defeat the strongest long um dragon. He's actually in a human form, and you actually get his spirit transformation. So he's pretty good. He's not it's all right, but I think that this guy right here is like the best transformation.
Bosses and stuff, you can unlock different transformations. This will allow you to turn into that typically prior enemy or some variant therein that lets you take on their moveset and health bar. Now this is important actually because it can give you a little bit of breathing room in combat, because this transformations health bar and stuff is entirely separate from your own, which can get you out of some tight spots very easily. And it's a good way to apply status effects as well, since a lot of them typically have some sort of status effect associated with their weapon attacks. Then we have magic. So as we progress the story, we will unlock a variety of different magical abilities, which fall into a few different categories: mysticism, alteration, and strand. And there's a few spells of each type, which is important because you can only equip one of each type at a time. Now this is how we're going to do stuff like immobilize enemies, drop decoys,
This is like the best spell ever, immobilize. Like if you upgrade it to the highest tier, I recommend upgrading immobilize and pluck of many. Those are the two that you're going to use throughout the whole game. I kid you not. Cloud step is another spell that's pretty good. But I think that it's just, I feel like it's like a temporary spell that's pretty good on like certain situations. Rock solid, I don't really use it that much. And there's another one, I think it's spellbind. Spellbind is pretty good. The only thing is that it doesn't allow you to use other spells, so it locks you out from every other spell, but it does make like your combos of your staff much harder to hit on enemies, and it increases the attack. But basically immobilize and cloud step, I'm sorry, immobilize and pluck of many are going to be your two best friends in this game when it comes to spells.
disappear and then hit enemies with side attacks, summon in multiple versions of ourself, and in New Game Plus, even potentially cheat death. Also probably important to mention that I think it's in Chapter 2, if I recall correctly, you get a spell that kind of turns you into iron for a brief moment, and that is what is going to act as this game's parry or block system that you otherwise don't have access to. So if that's what you want, you need to be using that spell.
Yeah, it sucks that we need a spell in order to parry. Like, I wish we could just parry on our own instead of using a spell, but
Specifically. Then we have
that's what we need dodge for. We use dodge for that, so.
pills and gourds. So pills are unlocked in Chapter 2, I believe. As part of a side quest, you can meet this sort of dog-like NPC character that if you bring him certain items that will drop off of larger enemies and sometimes can just be found, alongside a little bit of will, which is our currency for the game, he can make you medicines that will permanently upgrade parts of your character, including things like status effect resistance, defense, health, mana, stamina, all that stuff.
So I would say when it comes to upgrading your stuff, obviously upgrade your health, but I would definitely recommend to upgrade your mana. Your mana and your stamina. Yes, you can upgrade. Obviously, you have to upgrade your defense, but mana is what's going to help you in this game. Mana is basically your magic. It's what you use to use your spells. Definitely recommend to upgrade your mana to the highest tier as well as your health, because mana is literally your other best friend. So
you can also find a few pills just out and about in these little containers that will also permanently increase these things to much greater effect. And all of these have limits on their number, so you will eventually max these out. Now after that we have gourds. Acting as our healing item, we drink from a gourd to heal, and it has a set number of charges, as well as the actual contents of that gourd changing depending on what you have access to. So there's a bunch of different gourds which all have different effects. In my opinion, the basic heal so much health one is always the best, but there are others that have different effects, like say healing you for less but increasing your attack at the same time, and you have to find or potentially buy those from an NPC that you meet relatively early on but whose inventory expands over the course of the game, and he will also sell you soaks as well, and you can also find these in other places, but these are things that you will put into your gourd to give them extra effects on top of what the gourd will normally do. But wait, there's more. Then there's the actual drink that's in the gourd to begin with. There are a few different wines and stuff which can also customize exactly what your gourd is doing. Now, overall, I would say generally I like a pretty standard approach to this system myself. I just want to heal when I use it.
Honestly, yeah, this one right here that he's looking at, Long Bomb, is pretty good because you see right here, you can put up to 4 soaks. And that's pretty good because some of these soaks, they can give you more, like if you drink it once, it's going to keep healing you for like what, 30 seconds or something, or it will recover at least 30 or 40% of your maximum health. The same thing with the mana, it will recover your mana. And then there's other soaks that can upgrade, that's going to make like your attacks a little bit stronger, and also it will upgrade your stamina as well as your defense.
It's a healing item basically, but I really like the variety here because I think it takes a basically cornerstone mechanic.
And also I wanted to say about the gourds, if like what I did in my sites in my story is that the first gourd that you ever get in the game, definitely do not sell it. I don't even know if you can sell it, but definitely, I mean, obviously you're going to encounter better gourds, right? But the first one you ever get in the game, I would suggest to upgrade it to the highest tier, at least up to level 10. And then once you get to chapter 5, I believe, which is the fire chapter, you have to go to Rashna Place. There is a guy in a small temple that's like, I think he's on the ground drinking. If you go to him while you have upgraded your first gourd to the highest tier, he will upgrade your gourd to a supreme gourd, which is the best gourd in the game. So I definitely recommend to upgrade your gourd, your first gourd, not the second, third, or fourth, the first gourd you ever get, to the highest level, which is I think 10, and then go to the guy, and then he will upgrade it to supreme gourd. And the supreme gourd, what it does is that even if you drink it once, it's not gonna like cut your gourd in half. There's some gourds where it's like you drink it once and then it's like half of the drink is gone. No, it will take like at least 10% of the gourd and it will last you for a long time. And it's also very good to do that right before a nice boss fight, especially a boss fight that has at least 2 to 3 forms, because God only knows. Jesus
adds a bunch of variations to it. So I do like when games try to mix up how it is your character is healing. Now, believe it or not, we are still not done with progression systems because I got to tell you about relics and vessels. So relics, the things we are actually after as each chapter progresses. Once that chapter is over, you can click on those relics and choose between one of 3 different buffs to give yourself, which then of course is just passively in effect all the time. Then there are vessels. These are associated with secrets, meaning that if you do a little bit extra, you can.
So the thing with the relics, I was a little bit confused because I was like, what do they do? And then I had to really look it up to see which one was the best to pick, because they do different things and whatever. So I would definitely recommend, before you pick what kind of attribute you want for the relic, like you see how it said 3 options, I would suggest looking it up on Google and figuring out which ones are the best, because once you click on one, you cannot reset it. It stays permanent. So I would definitely recommend looking it up first, which is the best option to pick for every relic, and go with that.
Can find up to 4 of.
I would say the one that has like critical damage is the best option for a relic.
These vessels. These are things you can also activate in combat and recharge over time that provide some benefit for the allotted amount of time. Now, the reason these are secret is because used against certain bosses, they do more than they normally would, or just deal extra damage, that type of thing. So for instance, there's one in the very first chapter you can find that makes your character immune to fire. And that's important because the big boss of that first chapter is a guy who's spewing fire everywhere. So the benefits there are obvious. But even after those fights are over, you just get to keep those vessels and keep using them, which is important to keep in mind. Now, discounting all of that, we then have all of our secondary progression. So unlocking fast travel points via the shrines or finding secrets can also lead you to other things, or just more of any of the things I just mentioned. And even simply progressing the story can unlock more areas after that chapter is over. So for instance, clearing chapter 5 actually unlocks a secret side area after the fact that you can then go fight even more bosses in, which is as good a time as any to talk about gameplay, the world, and combat overall, because gameplay and combat are kind of synonymous in a game like this. But as I mentioned earlier, the game is divided up into chapters. There are 6 of them. Each of these are these large open areas with all sorts of secrets and paths to uncover. And after you clear the story for those chapters, running back through that chapter is usually a good idea because stuff can change and you can find even more secrets. And along the way, you'll meet characters who are going to have tasks for you. Unlike a Souls-like game, they are typically very direct in what they're asking you. It's usually not a mystery what they want, which was helpful in tracking down some of these secrets. And I like that approach quite a bit because it gives you side quests that can be a little mysterious and somewhat puzzling at the same time, but also you don't spend forever trying to figure it out. But typically, those are going to lead you to more bosses, more secrets, which then themselves drop more items and stuff to lend you to that progression. So it all kind of...
This one right here, the foo bar, he was actually pretty easy. Like he's like literally just, he's like one of the easiest boss fights ever because you just have to like just dodge his attacks. He doesn't do any crazy combos and just hit his legs. That's really it.
comes together to feel like you are constantly progressing something no matter what you're doing. And I think for an action game like this, that works very, very well. Now, talking a little bit more specifically about combat, though, there's a few important things to mention. Now, I want to start off with something it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out, which was funny because I was doing really well, despite how long it took me to figure this out. As part of your skill trees, you can unlock different stances for your staves, which is obvious, but in so upgrading those, you then start unlocking more and more focus points. Focus points are what your character is going to spend to use what they call things like varied combos. Basically, if you are doing light attacks and then mix in a big heavy attack, based on your skill upgrades, that will do something more varied, as the name might imply. But this comes with like specific attacks and things using those focus points, depending on how many you use and everything. However, those focus points, when spent, can also get you your health back, which can help you mitigate having to use your gourd so much, which is the part it took me way too long to figure out. But otherwise, it's melee combat, it's very fast-paced for the most part. You got light attacks, heavy...
So as far as the focus points, if you see right here, well, sorry about that. If you see at the bottom right corner, he has like a little circle. If you upgrade it to like the 4th focus point or whatever, you'll be able to like you're at like especially if you're using like a stance attack, like a pillar attack, or as well as like a straight attack or whatever. Once you hit your enemies, that's gonna make so much damage. So I do recommend to upgrade your focus point to at least 3. I don't think you get up to 4. You get like 3 focus points, and once you use them, you gain focus point by hitting the enemy, obviously. And then once you have all 3 focus points, definitely will make more damage to the enemy.
Attacks, and then you're going to weave your magic into that to pull off like certain combos and stuff. And then things like your armor and whatnot are going to have bonuses that then apply to combat that then make it more varied and interesting. So my personal favorite approach was the immobilize spell combined with skills and abilities and an armor set actually that made me do more and more damage to enemies that were immobilized. Now there are a couple of bosses in the game that sort of hard counter this, and any like big moment for a boss that's like scripted and they're going to do something mechanical, they're going to break out of that immobilize. So I could see that not being everybody's cup of tea, and you may want to lean a little more heavily on just straight up melee combat and getting good at that part to improve just how good you are at the game specifically. But I use that as an example to tell you that there are all sorts of different little ways you can go about this. You can lean more heavily on the focus points and the melee combos and the varied combos. You can get different staff styles like pillar or thrust that change the very nature of how you're attacking to begin with, and learning when to weave in charged heavy attacks which can do massive damage to enemies and then stagger them is all important to know. Now, pretty much all of that, though, is going to be...
Oh my God, this guy, I forgot to mention, the Stone Vanguard, I was stuck on this guy for at least an hour. Just because like his attacks are like really slow, but what it is that once you're hitting him in the back, he freaking does like a back sweep that does a lot of damage, and it's ridiculous. So I was stuck on this guy for like an hour. I would definitely recommend to use a lot of Cloud Step, a lot of Immobilize, and also once he starts throwing rocks at you and then sticks his hand in the ground, he's gonna start throwing minions at you, and then that's when what is it? Rock slide or whatever it is, rock solid, that's when it comes in handy. Because once he throws those minions at you, he's gonna go in the air, he's gonna attack you from above, and then you can counter it with rock solid. So
limited by a stamina bar. Your stamina bar is very generous. The only time I ever really ran out of stamina is when I was beating a boss so badly that they were basically not able to respond at all, and I was able to keep up the pressure to the point that I eventually just ran out of stamina. Stamina was almost never a factor.
Yeah, that too. Whenever he does that like ground thing, like once he's idle and he's not doing anything, and then once he tries to hit you, he will do that whole rock thing in order to hit you. So definitely, you have to really dodge with this guy a lot. It took me a while to defeat him, an hour.
In anything I was doing, except in very few occasions, typically because I was doing so well that I was running out of stamina because I was pressing the attack so much. So I wouldn't get too intimidated by the stamina bar personally. But then there's all that other stuff that I mentioned. So the spells. Again, you have to use a spell if you want to do things like parry or block, and upgrading that spell can make that extremely effective. The window for it is very generous, and while personally I preferred the default dodge gameplay just because that's typically how I play these games anyway, that option is available for you, and it certainly seems effective to say the least. And then another cheap but effective spell was Cloud Strike. This leaves behind like a decoy and turns you invisible, and then you can rush up and attack an enemy and typically stagger them at the same time, which is a convenient way to get a good cheap strike in to then press into a combo. And that's even before we start weaving in stuff like the transformations or the vessels. Transformations themselves can be upgraded to last longer and just be more effective while you're in that state, so you can even lean into that if you wanted to. Those recharge over time relatively quickly even, so you can use transformations multiple times in combat if it lasts that long. And then deciding when to use spirits as well and their special attacks can also be a big part of it. And then there's your vessel. Maybe you want to save that for a certain phase of a boss fight. So there are all of these different moving parts to combat that I think make it really, really fun to engage with. And if you are using all of those systems to their fullest, I don't think you'll struggle with this game's combat system, frankly. But all of that is well and good, but in a game where combat is king, and you can focus on so many different aspects of it if you want, I think a lot of people's enjoyment is going to come down to the quality of the boss fights and things like that. And for the most part, I thought these were tremendous as well. This game has some of the most spectacular boss fights I've seen that were just a real spectacle to behold. And while obviously I don't want to spoil all these for anybody, I did want to call out my favorite in particular. This fight against Kangjin Lung, which is this white dragon that you fight in Act 3, and that boss fight is just gorgeous and really intimidating at the same time.
Oh my God, I got stuck on this one too. I'm not gonna lie, I got stuck on several bosses. This one was so freaking frustrating. It took me almost an hour also.
Same time, because the dragon is often up in the air throwing lightning strikes at you that you got to avoid, and then when it swoops in, you've got to pick your moment to jump in and attack and everything. And while I honestly wouldn't even consider it that hard of a fight, it was just an incredible spectacle, and I loved the setting and the vibe of it. And that is just cool. One fight in a game
that was so cool. He actually immobilized him while it was fire breathing like that. That's pretty cool.
That has a nonsense number of really impressive boss fights. So even outside of what your character can do, I think this game did the actual fights themselves right as well. But I did want to mention a lot of these can be kind of mechanical in nature at times. And what I mean by that is that there are moments where the enemy is going to like jump up and do something scripted out of your reach, and you have to wait for them to finish that attack. And they'll break out of like an immobilized spell if you were trying to hold them down, and they'll even stop taking damage in order to do that thing. And if I had to point to something about like the boss fights and the combat that I didn't enjoy, that would probably be it. And what's more, in a problem that plagues basically every action combat game to have ever existed, the lock-on systems and camera can absolutely be a little finicky at times. And while it didn't happen often, I will say that there are definitely moments where I died simply because I couldn't see anything, or the lock-on just kept rapidly switching between enemies in a really annoying fashion. So the game isn't free from problems here, but they were rare enough to be of little importance, I would say. Now, all of that finally brings us to the Steam Deck section. Now, I have to admit, I just assumed this was going to play pretty terribly on the Steam Deck, but surprisingly no. If you turn the settings down so it's not going to look quite as visually impressive, you can still get a really solid FPS and play this on the Steam Deck. And obviously, it has controller support, cloud support, all that stuff, so you're going to be able to switch between them on the fly if you want. And while I personally wouldn't want to play this on that platform, it is more playable on the Steam Deck than I personally would have given it credit for, which I think is noteworthy all on its own. Now, it does not have a Steam Deck rating. I don't think they've submitted it for a rating even, so kind of use your own discretion on that one. But that brings us to the positives and negatives, and then we will wrap this thing up. So on the positive side of things, I think the combat especially, obviously, and it's the main focus, it better be a positive, the secrets and the exploration were really where I was having the most fun. Just taking down these spectacles of a boss fight, getting more and more progression and skill under my own belt as you go was a really rewarding experience. And then coupling that with exploring these levels really thoroughly and finding all this stuff, secrets, extra optional boss fights even, was just a real blast. And puzzling that out was definitely the highlight of this experience. Now, unfortunately, that does come with a few negatives. As I mentioned, the pacing of the game at times I think could use some work. For whatever reason, Act 3 is crazy long, and I was very burnt out on that place by the end of it, as a single example. But then this pops up in other places like Chapter 6, which I think was a really weak chapter until you get to the actual end of it. And that stuff coupled with, I would say, negatives that are, again, very traditional for the genre, if anything, which are camera issues, lock-on issues, and just little bits of jank here. Like, for instance, a lot of levels look really open, but then you hit a bunch of invisible walls that probably could have stood to be masked a little better, can make for some small annoyances. For the most part, I think those are minor gripes, and they're not enough.
Yeah, I went through the same thing, like what he said about like the lock on and the chapter 3 being super long. Like, I definitely agree with that. And chapter 6, I wouldn't say that it was a cheap chapter. I mean, cheap, like a weak chapter. I just feel like, I guess, because we went through so many chapters, so many boss fights, and so many things that now going towards the game is like they're probably like, you know what, we're just gonna put a bunch of bosses for the player to get Wukong's main gear and then go on with it. So I think that's what they were trying to go for, is to kind of wrap things up. Like, okay, you're gonna defeat this one, this one, this one. If you want to defeat these other secret ones, you can. But they just wanted to kind of like, okay, now we're gonna push you towards like the final boss. So I get what he's saying, and then I get what the game developers did on there.
Of an issue to really get in the way of the rest of the game. Which brings me to my conclusion. My conclusion for Black Myth Wukong is that as action RPGs go, this is a must play. Now, if you don't like this genre of games, I don't think this game is going to do anything for you, as it honestly has little else to offer. But if you enjoy what I've laid out here in this review, Black Myth Wukong does it extremely well. And as a result, I think easily made itself a pillar of what that genre is all about. Thus, while I'm labeling it a must-play, and therefore, obviously, a buy from me. I did pay for this one, and as far as I'm concerned, it was money well spent. I had a blast with it. Which is where I'm going to end this particular video. So I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe.
All right, so shout out to Maltisma Gaming. Yeah, I had a blast with this game too. I'm not really a fan of Elden Ring, Dark Souls games or whatever, but the front of this cover of this video game like intrigued me. I'm like, what is Black Myth Wukong? What is a monkey doing in front of a game, in front of the cover game? Like, what is this game about? And I think I saw the trailer of it, but it just really, really intrigued me. And I'm like, I'm going to buy this game. I want to see what it's about. So it, like I said, it does have so many elements of God of War. And I'm a super, super huge fan of God of War. I love God of War. I played all of the God of War games, beat them all. I love it. And so when this game came out and I started playing it, I had a huge blast as well, defeating these bosses, uncovering secrets, uncovering secret areas to get, to get to the secret bosses and defeating them. Overall, the game was phenomenal. Just a little bit of, cons here and there. The lock-on system, chapter 3 being too long. Chapter 6 was just like really short and whatever. It's just minor things, but overall, this game is freaking amazing. I didn't have any other complaints other than it kind of froze. It was kind of freezing in some scenes when I was recording, but it's just technical error. It's okay. I think they just did an update on the PlayStation for the game, so I think everything should be fine once I get into the new game plus. But yeah, this was my review, and I hope that this game wins Game of the Year. I am praying for it because this studio definitely deserves it. They did an amazing job. It took probably years to make this game. I'm definitely going to be playing this in New Game Plus. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's go.